everyone. My name is Kat Savage, and I'm a professional artist, clinical hypnotherapist, and well-being expert working with those in the creative arts sector. In my line of work, I get to meet some amazing, colourful people, from actors to artists, people who live their lives by their own rules, fueled by passion and determination to bring their unique talents into the world. I wanted to discover what it took for people to leave the usual 9 to 5 and hop on a dream, to capture their bravest moments and share these meaningful conversations with you, so that together we can explore the ideas, emotions, and moments that could potentially change our lives too. So let's keep talking, have some fun, and enjoy the show. This week on the Brave Moments Writers mini-series, we speak to author, biographer and rock and roll historian, Dr. Jennifer Otter Bickerdike. Jennifer started her musical journey working with global record labels Sony, Polygram and Universal before becoming the West Coast marketing director at the worldwide dominating record label Interscope. Jennifer toured with acts such as Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Rage Against the Machine, Dr. Dre, Gwen Stefani, and Eminem before leaving to start her own consultant agency. After her friend Hunter McPherson was tragically murdered, she reevaluated her life, moved to the UK, and became a writer. To date, she has written 5 books, including her newest biography, Nico, You Are Beautiful and You Are Alone, under Faber and Faber, and has contributed to numerous newspapers, magazines, radio and television programs. And the Mayor of Santa Cruz has even declared September the 28th Jennifer Otter Bickerdike Day for her contribution to music culture and her community. It is with great pleasure that I introduce you to the iconic Dr. Jennifer Otter Bickerdike. Dr. Jennifer Otter Bickerdike, a rock and roll historian, author, queen of pop culture, and goddess of fandom. Welcome to the Brave Moment.
Oh, dude, it has been a year plus in the coming to reconnect with you. So fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I've just been so eager to have you on the show. I've literally been biting at the bit. So to hear your gorgeous voice is amazing. First of all, how does it feel coming out of lockdown for you? Because I know that you are another person who's heavily involved in the music scene. It seems like a massive historical event for us guys. How has it affected you in your work?
Do you know what I'm finding the most weird? And I'm like you, like very outgoing, very sociable. And I'm finding myself being like the ultimate hermit in terms of I don't like, I'm very I'm like, ooh, do I want to go out? I mean, I do, but I don't know. Like the first person I saw in the flesh was not my husband, pretty much, was my literary agent. And I talk to him all the time on the phone. I've been doing Zooms with him for the last 18 months or however long this hell has been going on for. But actually seeing him in real life, I was like, blur? Like I felt completely uncomfortable. And I just need to be, you know, those bubbles they put like hamsters in so they can roam around the house. I just need one of those, basically. It's just thrown off so many things. And that uncertainty, I think really what this comes down to is uncertainty of what's going to happen, is safety, like those kind of basic things that you just take for granted on a day-to-day basis in quote unquote normal life. Those are the things that I think have been massively impacted. And I mean like job security, health security, planning anything. Seems like you can't plan for anything. So all those things, I think that's the knock-on effect for me at least.
Oh my God, I totally and utterly hear you because, you know, obviously me and my husband, shout out Tim, we're musicians and we work in the industry. And for the last year and a half, we've had no work, which is something I talk about regularly on this podcast. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, listeners. But yeah, that uncertainty thing, it was like kind of exciting at the beginning of lockdown. Like it was like, oh wow, we've got some time off. And it was exciting to go walking around for about 6 months. And then we were like, okay, this is real. And then the last lockdown, I think we've just been in like this weird limbo land. It's been like a weird nightmare that you watch in a movie where you're just sort of doing the same thing day in, day out, just waiting to be allowed out. But I'm going to take us out of that little bubble for a moment because that's so depressing. I don't even want to think about it. And take you back into your childhood. Here we go. We are back in your childhood. And I just want to know about your life growing up. Like, what were you like as a child? And, you know, if your parents or your siblings are around, like, how would they describe you back then?
I would say it's hard for me to remember what I was like as a child, but the thing that I would say the most stands out to me is, and it's weird in this kind of moment of Me Too. Like, I try not to get sucked into talking about Me Too that much because I think it was growing up in Santa Cruz, California. It was growing up in the 70s and 80s and just kind of having the family I did. I never thought me being a girl made any difference to what I was able to do or what was possible for me. And that was really, and I say that because I remember, I have a very clear memory of being like 4 years old and my grandparents asking me like what I wanted to be. And I said, I wanted to be president of the United States. So,
I mean, you got close, so, you know.
I did end up being president of Green Acres Elementary when I was in 5th grade. And the person who was vice president, Tammy Katie, shout out, sis.
Hey, Tammy.
Yeah, she and I are still very close. And I've asked her many times, like, what was I the same? And she's like, you were exactly the same. She's like, you were just like very like smart aleck and cracking jokes. And Tammy was really, really short and I'm really tall. And she said that, you know, we used to make jokes about how we were kind of like Tweedledum and Tweedledee. She remembers all this crazy stuff that I don't remember. I'm like, do I have early onset Alzheimer's? My head's like my memory, seriously, Kat, is like a 7-Eleven, like a CCTV. Like as soon as it erases after the end of the day.
I can totally relate to that. In my house, I'm known as Dory because I can't remember anything. If someone tells me their name, it's instantly forgotten.
That's who
I remember
am.
people by their dogs now. Like that's the only way I can remember them.
Well, dogs are much more interesting most of the time than people. Another thing you and I share. But it's funny that remembering thing. I just got an email or a post on Facebook from someone I used to work with, like one of my first jobs in the music industry when I was 18. And he had this very clear and detailed memory of me being backstage at a show in San Francisco. I mean, we're going circa like 1992, so this is yonks ago. And apparently Dolores from the Cranberries was in a really crap mood, and she wouldn't do anything. And for some reason, I apparently went up to like, you know, I like voodooed her, and she was like in a good mood and happy. And she and I were gonna go clothes shopping, and we were just like bestesses. And I'm like, what are you? Seriously, Kat, I have no memory of this show. I have no memory of going backstage. I'm like, who are you talking? Like, I was like, burr. And I told him that. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And for him, it was like this big kind of OMG moment of the 90s. And for me, obviously, instantly forgettable. So I don't know what's wrong with me.
And yet she wrote Linger after it. So it must have been an impressive moment for her.
I was going to say, you know what? We're wondering where the inspiration came from. That's like, you know, revealed here first on your podcast.
I feel so honored. Wow. So I was going to ask you next what you remember about your family home, but it seems like that's probably a pointless question if you can't remember anything.
I remember actually more about my grandparents' house, if that might make me silly.
Go for it.
But like I'm not close to my immediate family, but strangely enough, I'm very close to my Aunt Janet. Hey, Aunt Jay and Uncle Ray. I promise I will try not to do any more shout outs.
Oh, no, crack on.
And my so I was really close to my grandparents on both sides of my family. So one of my grandparents, they had a house that was strangely, I don't know how they afforded this land or what you know, they did to get this. It was in the Carmel Highlands. It had a private beach. Their next door neighbor was Kim Novak. So it was quite magical as a kid to go there because it was the land itself had lots of trees and like opossums and was quite like it very much reminds me of like the Cornish kind of wild coast, but that was their yard.
Wow.
And so just being in that was very much like secret garden vibes. And then from that, you know, being around the beach was a huge part of that's like the DNA of who I am. Like my first memory is literally at Thanksgiving, which is in November, stripping off all my clothes at 3 years old and running into the sea, which must have like caused massive panic for my family. But that was just, and everything was like, every time we'd go visit, it'd always be about going surfing, going swimming, kayaking, being out on the coast, and that whole kind of ecological part of the sea and how important that is. So that was one side of my family. And then my other side of the family, Aunt Janet's side, actually, those grandparents were really inspiring to me because they were second generation Italian immigrants to America. And it was like exact opposite from the others. The two sides of the family were opposite. One was very, even though they lived in this great spot, it was more earthy. And the Italian grandparents, they had a very nice house, especially as a kid. I'm like, oh my God, this place is so nice. They have shag carpeting and like velvet wallpaper and a microwave oven. You know what I mean? Like they were like,
tactile.
living the dream. And I love just going there and like spending time with my grandma, my nanny. Like I remember getting up, you're asking the smells. One of my favorite smells still to this day is coffee, because I only got to see them. They lived probably 3 hours away from us. So I only probably saw them like 3 or 4 times a year. But my nanny would always get up early before anyone else in the house. And I always tried to get up as early as possible so I could just hang out with her. And it was just our time together. And the smell coffee really reminds me of that, because she'd always be drinking coffee. I know it sounds kind of very basic.
No, do you know what? I really relate to that, because my mum's family, her mum and dad were from Belgium. So Jean-Louis and Pierre.
Oh my God, I love that.
They're so, bless their hearts, may they rest in peace. They were just the best grandparents ever. But similarly, black coffee in the morning in these brown, I don't know if you can remember this maybe from your childhood, but they used to have these like brown ceramic cups with like darker brown flower 70s pattern in them.
Girl, if I could find I think I even saw something not dissimilar to that not long ago. And I said, James, my husband, I'm like, I want that. And he was just like, I don't know how your husband Tim is, but James is, for the most part, he lets me kind of decorate or do whatever, my taxidermy, my porcelain dogs. But like sometimes he does have to have an intervention and be like, no. One last thing about the grandparents I have to say, though, and this is like going to sound really sad and macabre, but when my nanny, my grandma died, she died when I was probably 20 or 21, so I wasn't very old. And for years and years and years, we're talking like a decade plus, I had a recurring dream that I'd wake up, I'd be my adult self, I'd be in the bedroom we slept in at Nani and Nano's house. I would come down the stairs and my Nani would be sitting in her chair and I would be like, oh my God, you're alive. I'm so happy. And like, I'd run to her and like, she'd hug me and I'd hug her. And I'd just be like crying because she was alive. And then she'd be like, I'm not alive, but I'm always with you. And I'd wake up sobbing. Like I'd wake up because I was so just like, oh my God, she's gone. And here's the crazy thing. After I met my husband, I stopped having that dream. Isn't that weird?
It's as if she was like, right, okay, I need someone to take my place.
Yes.
And I'm going to send you this guy. He's a saint, so crack on.
Yeah, exactly. It's so cheesy, but it's like so true and it freaks me out. In fact, my Nani Nano had this, it's like a vintage Barnum and Bailey poster it's probably from like the 1930s. They had it like framed above where they would sit in their family room. And I just had it delivered from California. I'm actually looking at it right now.
Aww.
And I can hardly wait to put it up and just have like that vibes. So yeah, so that was my family life, the kind of like rustic secret garden beach, and then the Italian grandparents who were just complete badasses. So that was them.
So badass that they come and visit you in your dreams. Yeah, I love that.
Do you know what's strange though? I don't know if you found this with your grandparents, is finding out stuff about them as an adult. And I'm like,
Totally.
I wish I would do anything for like 10 minutes with my nanny. Like my Aunt Janet was telling me how my nanny, this is like when she was a kid, she would, this is before ski lifts. She'd go skiing all the time and she would dredge up the hill in the snow carrying her own skis and then ski down. I'm like, what a kick-ass queen is that? So suddenly you start understanding yourself and it's like, I want to do a good job at the things I do to almost pay tribute to the woman she was, you know?
So I was going to ask next, can you remember the first book that made an impression on you as a child? And did you have an intuition at that point that you might like to go into writing? Like, were you creative in that way as a kid?
That's a really good question. My first book I remember reading, you're going to laugh at this because I told you before we started recording that I interviewed Johnny Marr yesterday from the Smiths, and who's my
just casually.
Yeah, just casually. My number one guitar hero of all time. The Smiths changed my life. I probably would have killed myself without the Smiths, not to be dramatic, but it's true. And it's funny because he and I were talking about how there's these certain kind of touch points, whether it's a record or a book. And when you interact or engage with it now, it almost like, you almost fall into a wormhole of time and go back to it. And you see how that, listening to that song or reading that book almost was that domino, how everything else kind of fell after that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
So like he was talking about how All the Young Dudes by Mott the Hoople, that's his kind of thing like that. That's his kind of starting point. And no matter like how whatever else happens, that is the DNA of who he is. And so for a book, the book I remember first reading on my own, I was 5, and it was an illustrated Pride and Prejudice at the Live Oak, Live Oak Elementary School library.
Wow.
So that's my first ever book. And then I got really into death. I was probably like 2nd or 3rd grade. And I just remember going to the library and this is when there were card catalogs, and looking through the card catalogs for books about kids dying, because I couldn't understand death. I couldn't understand. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to understand, especially how someone my age-ish could die. So I was reading really inappropriate things for like, you know, a 7 or 8-year-old. So there's a great book called Beat the Turtle Drum by Constance C. Green. And it's about these 2 girls, and one of them's the more favorite, and the favorite one dies, and how the older girl deals with that loss. And I remember just reading that over and over and over. I'm just getting goosebumps talking about it, trying to figure out how death works. You know what I mean? So those probably are my 2 that I would, but of course I have to just drop a mention of Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, the greatest book ever written.
That literally, I mean, I learned about periods, I learned about boys. Oh, yeah. That was the first book that my mum sort of handed me and said, this is your Bible now, you must read it. And it really did help, like at the time, like to understand my body and my feelings. Like, oh, Judy Blume, she's such a legend. She's doing a masterclass on the Masterclass app at the moment. Totally check it out.
Oh my God. Yeah. Like Beverly Cleary, who wrote the Ramona books, just recently passed away.
Oh no.
Have you read Ramona? Like Ramona the Past, Ramona all those. So that was, I would say Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary, very different kinds of books, but Beverly Cleary's books, you know, that the whole Quimby family, very like middle class, working class family. And I actually bought all of the books since I've lived in England. I bought the entire Ramona set.
Well done.
And I'm reading back as you read them as an adult, and you're just like, there's some heavy stuff happening here. You know what I mean?
So inappropriate for a tiny person.
Yeah. But it's just, I think now looking back at it, you start understanding, you know, as a kid, you're like relating to Ramona, or you're relating to Margaret. As an adult, you're reading it, and you just, as a writer, you go, God, these authors are just so brilliant to be able to weave these things together. You know, it's amazing. So those are, I would say those. But I do have a funny story about Judy Blume. I went through this weird phase. It's not weird, it's wonderful. Where I wanted to get first edition Judy Blume books. And this is before Amazon or eBay was really a big thing. And I was on the road. This is back when I was working for a record label. I was on the road with the band Queens of the Stone Age. And it was during the period. Yeah,
sometimes I forget how awesome your life is.
Oh God, stop. No, it was during the period when Dave Grohl was playing with Queens of the Stone Age. And I don't know like how this happened. So I'd go to you go to a town, and you know how it is being on tour. You go to a town, and like, if you have time, you'll hit like the vintage stores, the record stores, the bookstores. So I was always like, bookstore, must find Judy Blume. So over the course of like a 3-month tour, I had gotten like, Are You There, God? To Me, Margaret. Then again, Maybe I Don't. Fourth Grade, Nothing. I'd gotten all of these books, but every time we flew, the books had to have their own bag. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then come on the baggage carousel. So for some reason, I don't know what I'd packed these books in, but the books explode. The bag I'd put all my first edition Judy Blumes in had exploded on the baggage carousel.
No!
Yeah. And I just have this really clear memory of like, I was like, oh God, and like frantically trying to get them and like not having to be more mangled. Yeah, Judy. And Dave Grohl, for some reason, was there with me. And he was like frantically also trying to help me like pick up the books. And I remember him like picking up like once again, Then Again, Maybe I Don't, which is like which it has like masturbation and all other kind of themes in it. And him picking up and looking at it and going, this is a really good book. So
I love that Dave Grohl appreciates the Bloom.
Oh,
I mean, what a legend.
I mean, these books are like spinning around this carousel and he like is helping me. And then it's like, he suddenly just has like this moment of his own where he's like, yeah, this is the good shit right here. You know, Blair.
It wasn't the same for guys. I think back there, you know, we talk a little bit about like passive sexism, but the books that like Tim would be reading would be like Lord of the Rings and stuff, which are epic, amazing, incredible books, but they didn't really teach you about handling your emotions in the same way as God bless her, Judy did.
I don't even know if that would have been. I don't know how that would have even like, because like Beverly Cleary did some books with Henry Huggins. That was the male protagonist, but they weren't the same. It was like him and his dog, or you know, him. It wasn't and maybe I've not read those again as an adult, but there was some quality about these books that were so geared to me as a young girl and young woman growing up. I don't know if that would have worked at the same time for a boys series, or if that even exists now. Maybe we've just identified a new thing we should do.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. Cat Otter Bickerdike. Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, I love it.
Forces. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I'm just like, as you're talking about this, I'm just reminiscing about my own sort of childhood bookstore, and I've always loved books, and I'm not a talented writer in the same way that you are, my dear.
Oh, stop.
But I do appreciate good writing, and I've recently, like, you know, you're talking about death and macabre and stuff. I've recently got into a book which is about Swedish death cleaning, and that's a really weird tangent to go down, but just jumping off what you said about the death thing, it's fascinating how we interpret that, especially in England, because we're quite reserved and we don't really talk about it in the same way as, like, I don't know, our Mexican friends.
I was gonna say, I think you totally talk about it more than we do in America, because I remember when I first started coming over here, one of the things that fascinated me so much, and now I take it for granted because I've been living here for over a decade, but is you would go into, like, I live in Kingston upon Thames, and every weekend we walk into town, get a coffee, and then go to the grocery store. And part of town is a church with a graveyard in it. And in America, the graveyards are completely separate. Like, we do, the dead are kept as far away as possible from our view.
Wow.
So the way that the English, or I should say English, because I've not spent a great amount of time in other areas of the UK, but the way that death is incorporated into the everyday, I found really fascinating. And I just think death is a weird one, because it just, you don't know what happens, and there's no coming back from it. So in one way, I think for me, it's the hugest motivator, because, you know, the thing that made me move here was one of my friends was murdered, and that, like, you know,
whoa,
that was the biggest, that's probably one of the biggest, I would always say, like, discovering that, like, not making the Olympics in swimming, discovering the Smiths, Hunter dying, and getting married are probably like my 4 big kind of things that changed the direction of my life. And that just, now it's like, whenever I get really, really stressed, I just kind of have to check myself and be like, at least I have the space to be stressed. I have the opportunity to be anxious. I have, you know, because you only get one shot that we know of at this. So don't worry so much, you know.
If Hunter was here now, what do you think they'd say about who you've become? Do you think they'd be super proud of you?
I hope so. I'm really close to Hunter's parents. And I actually, like my last book was dedicated to Hunter. And I mean, Hunter's whole thing was, if you're going to, it's kind of cheesy, but it's true. It's like, if you're going to go out for, if you're going to go for fishing, go for Moby Dick. So go as big as you possibly can. Because if you go big, the worst that can happen is you end up with like a small minnow, but then you still have something and you've gone for it.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of my motto. And one of the things that Hunter used to always say is true is true. Like a bunch of my friends, we have it tattooed on us. And I think when you kind of break that down, like just cut through the bullshit. Like, what is it you really want? And I think that's a hard question to look in the mirror and ask yourself and be totally authentic with that. It's been hard for me. Regret's the biggest bitch of all, I think. And that's what I want to avoid more than anything else. I hadn't talked to him in probably like 5 or 6 years when he died. And what I was doing at the time, I was the West Coast marketing director at a big record label. I was dating a well-known musician, and just when I think about it and I really look what was happening, I'm like, I probably had a drinking problem. I was out drinking probably 6-7 nights a week, and just not really being a very happy, and really kind of suppressing like the pain and hurt from childhood. And then I'd had a really bad romantic breakup, and kind of hiding behind the alcohol, the drugs, the job, the bad relationship I was in. And when Hunter died, it just kind of was it's almost like a guillotine. Like, it's like, bang. I'm like, what the hell am I doing? Like, what am I doing? And I mean, I cut off the relationship. I quit the job. And I just kind of, that really started me on the path that I'm on, that brought me to England, actually, because I'm like, Hunter does not have the ability to do any of these things I can do. And to think about, true is true. Go for the biggest you can go. I'm like, I'm not gonna honor his memory or who he was or could have been unless I do that. And so that's been a driving force for me for a long time.
What happened next? Where did the writing come in? Where did that even hit you? Was that later on? Was it at that moment? What was going through your mind at that point?
Well, actually, I realized, looking back on it, going back to the Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, I was cleaning out my storage unit last weekend, and I found a short story I'd written probably in like 5th grade that I still have. And so for me, writing's always been a thing that I've wanted to do, but it's that idea of what my friend Alex White, hey Alex, girl, she's amazing. She is the first female Olympic skateboarding judge.
Oh, shut the front door.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
You should get her on the podcast. She's so badass and amazing. She calls it the possibility model. And isn't that good?
That sounds sexy. Tell me more.
I know, I love it. So the possibility, because she and I got in this whole thing about, she is a queer skateboarder, and we were talking about how annoying it is, and that kind of conundrum of being like, I'm a trans male to female skateboarder. It's like, why can't I just be a skateboarder?
Yeah,
why do I have to be defined? And I was saying this, and you probably get this a lot, Kat, like, woman in the music business. And what she said is, as much as it's like you hate it, you are creating a possibility model for someone later on, so they won't have to go through that.
What a legend.
So with the writing, I think it was just not something I ever thought. I didn't go, I can't do that, but it just seemed like it would be like me saying, I'm going to go walk on the moon with my dog, Alfie. It just was something that was not even in my mind that I could actually do or have a career, even though it was something I loved, if that makes sense. And then when Hunter died, like, I found this thing that writing was something I'd always do just for fun for myself, like writing what was going on or short stories or whatever.
Sure.
And after Hunter died, I had written this piece about going to his funeral and like the changes and like fantastical things I wanted to do. And one of them was writing. And, when probably about 5 years ago, I was teaching at a university, and I was like, you know what, is this really it? Like, I'd done a couple academic books, which I loved the writing, but I'm like, I don't know anyone else that has worked at a major record label. I've worked at Facebook. I've done just the things I've done. And being a girl too, I'm like, why can't I be that person that goes for it and has a voice in a more commercial way?
Yes.
So 5 years ago, my husband was very supportive. I just did my first commercial book, and it's been from there. And it's not been easy, because I was, again, like saying this to Alex when she and I talked. I feel like I'm in, like, let's say I graduated from college. I feel like I'm about I'm age like 25 or 26 in my career in terms of how far along I am with the writing, in terms of where I should be. But I'm having to like I work extra hard because I'm 20 years older than that. You know what I mean? So yeah, but I am very grateful, and it is something I love doing. It's something like we were talking about different financial changes. My husband and I are like, our financial plan's off, but he's like, you'll probably be working until you're dead because I love writing so much. I can't imagine not doing it,
I'm so pleased you said that, obviously, because you are part of the writers series here on The Brave Month. So I want to know, before we get into the biography of Nico, because I'm so excited to talk about that, she's such a legend. Like, how did you put pen to paper for yourself? So, apart from the academic stuff that you'd written before, what was it like to start that book that was purely yours? And how did you come up with the idea for it?
So the first book was because I really, really, really wanted to do a book about yacht rock. I'm a huge Hall & Oates fan, love Michael McDonald, and my agent. I'd have the agent I had at the time, literary agent. I'd bring her I'd be like, look at this amazing record cover, look at this, and she's like, you should do a book about why vinyl matters. And I'm like, okay. And so that was the idea, and pretty quickly, she found a publisher that was interested in it, and I didn't really have an idea of how it was going to be. I wasn't like, I'm going to write it like this. This kind of answers your question. I think the fun part is figuring out there's this kind of balance you have to do between what's fun and interesting for you to write and what you think is going to be fun and interesting for other people to read. So when I did Why Vinyl Matters, is basically just a bunch of interviews for the most part with people talking about why vinyl is important to them. So I literally just wrote a list of people that I would want to talk to, but that I thought that other people would be interested in too. And I think this is a really important lesson with writing or anything else, is just you have to put yourself out there. So the first person I reached out to was Henry Rollins, who by this time I'd been out of the music industry for about 6 or 7 years. So that's a lifetime in the music industry. So I reached out to Henry Rollins, didn't know him, found his email address, and I was like, hello, I'm thinking about doing this book. You don't know me. And within probably a couple hours, actually, I couldn't believe it, he responded. And he was just like, hey, I'll give you an amazing interview once you have a book deal. And you can tell people I'm attached to this project. That helps you get interviews and helps you get a book deal.
What a legend.
So he doesn't know who I am. I'm just some random freak, just eh. So yeah, so that I would say in terms of getting pen to paper, that was kind of how I started out. I'm like, what would I want to read? What would my friends want to read? And you just kind of go from there. And yeah, and that relationship with Henry is, let me see if I can, here it is. He got sent an early copy of the Nico book, and he sent me this email out of nowhere. I woke up on April 14th and I had this email from Henry. Jen, hey, congratulations. Look at this book. Wow, it just arrived. This is going to be great. You really did some work. She fascinates me. It just is so sweet. I'm just like, well, he doesn't have to send that to me. You know what I mean? So I think that just reach out to people. I mean, for every no you get, you will, for every 5 no's, you get 1 yes.
And it's so important, especially in this day and age. We've got so many ways of reaching out to people that there's really no excuse to not have the guts to do that. Because you can find people everywhere on Twitter. I mean, a lot of people that come on the show, I find them through Twitter. And yeah, like you say, for every no you get a yes. And luckily, you are one of those yeses. And you've just mentioned the biography of Nico. So I think we're going to transition nicely into it. And you mentioned before that you're a curious character when it comes to the dead celebrity, and she is, I mean, she's an unbelievable, complex character in the sort of Andy Warhol gang, isn't she? And when I listen to her, in old interviews or even just musically, she breaks my heart, but she makes me smile at the same time, it's so rare. Why was it important for you to write her story in particular?
To answer your question, that book started out an evening in Soho in London where I was out with a friend and we were drinking lots of wine and we were just like, what are some badass women musicians? And, I'm so boring. I'm like, Susie Sue. I always try to push Laura Branigan, who sang Gloria. Nobody else goes for that one. I'm like, Laura Branigan. But we were, I worship Stevie Nicks. So the kind of the normal cast of characters came up. And then we, of course, got on to Professor Google. And I'm like, and Nico is like top 20, like on all these different lists, like VH1, MTV, Rolling, like top most important women musicians. I'm like, I knew her mostly from the Royal Tenenbaums, that amazing scene where her music's throughout a couple key scenes in that movie. But I'm like, why is she so important? Like she was on that one Velvet Underground record. So that got my interest peaked. And I came home and I started like looking at more stuff. And the more I read about her, I'm like, oh my God, like her whole story is sad and mad and crazy, and it's just such a perfect, if you take the person out of it, it's such a perfect time capsule of gender and class and war and race and all these different things kind of colliding. I was saying to Mr. Marr yesterday, the feeling, the biggest feeling I got when I was writing the book was anger. And not at really? Nico, obviously, but how
she was treated in the industry.
She was treated.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And then also just how her memory has been treated. Like Shirley Manson from Garbage, bless her, she put a picture of herself up on Instagram of her holding an early copy of the book. And there was all kinds of messages underneath, like, oh, she was a junkie. Like, Shirley, you shouldn't be promoting a junkie. She was a racist, all these things. And I'm just kind of like, when we start taking people and places and incidents out of context, that's very dangerous. And we're definitely in that moment now. And I just, especially when it was women putting those comments up, I'm like, so you've always been a perfect person your whole life? It's like, yeah. I just think context is so important. And I think that we can learn so much from Nico's life.
And also for her having to survive in that environment.
Exactly. So yeah, it was really, really important to me. And I think, one of the threads that's running through our conversation here is that idea of being an artist and making art because it's important to you. And that, I think, is something in the world of, Instagram and instant everything, that if you look at it just from like a scene point of view, when you and I were coming up, it could be your little scene in your village or town, your group of friends, and it would grow organically and it would really mean something to you. It would create identity. And I think there's less and less opportunities for that because everything's immediately on YouTube and Facebook and TikTok and and the idea of monetization, the idea of as many eyes as possible looking at something, that has, in most situations, overcome creating something that's important to you because it's important to you and the value of that. And that was what Nico was all about. She was all about making music that was her story and was important to her. It wasn't about anyone else. It's this horrible kind of irony because here's someone that was valued for the way she looked above everything else, but she hated that. Like she's just like, can't you see me as an artist? Why does it have to be about the looks? Yeah. And yet that was the thing, that the looks got her out of Nazi Germany and the looks got her into the Warhol inner circle. It got her modeling jobs. It got her to meet different people. But the looks also, I think she felt, really held her back. And it's really, really problematic when you start reading different reviews and even interviews from kind of like the post Velvet Underground time. People are just like, she's lumpy, she's fat, like all this. I'm just like reading it going, how can you write about another person like this? And it's funny because my next book that I'm working on is about Britney Spears. And I
Britney Spears?
Yeah. It's on Britney Spears.
Hashtag free Britney. Oh my God, I'm so excited.
But I started on that right before I didn't know the documentary framing Britney Spears was coming out. But where I'm going with this is there's a definite parallel between the way that Britney was written about and used in the press
and managed.
And managed, and Nico, you know what I mean? Like
she is like such a massive part of the fabric of my childhood, and just again, so misunderstood, so estimated, just as a female entrepreneur.
And I have to say, the Free Britney LA crew, Megan, Kevin, and Leanne, they started the Free Britney movement out of Los Angeles, and they've been so supportive, especially Megan. She has like read through some of the stuff I've written about Britney to make sure it's factually correct. And it's just seeing that whole Free Britney movement. The thing that I think is most interesting about it is it's a real time how fandom can change the law.
Yeah.
And that I think is really powerful.
For those people, those aspiring creatives, those aspiring writers that are listening right now, what advice or tips could you give them just to start out and get going?
Right. I know that sounds really, really silly, but like, I think people spend so much time like worrying about like, what should I do? What should I do? You have to write. Like I try to write every day. I don't always succeed, but write every single day because you get better and better and better and better and better. And it gets easier and easier and easier to do. Also, I hate to tell people to do stuff for free because that's crap, but you do have to do, be willing to take stuff just so you can start building up your portfolio and start getting your name out there. I think that's really important. And just the networking piece is so crucial. And this is an obvious thing, but this is to anyone who uses any sort of website, social media, anything. I forget, you're going to laugh at this, Kat. When I do freelance work, I forget that, oh, it's up on a website for someone to read. Like someone can go back and look at The Guardian. I'm always like, oh, 300 pounds. Fantastic. I can go get a manicure or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that's how I look at it. But I have to tell you this is like a good story to kind of tie this all together. One of my favorite groups growing up was the band, The Bangles.
I love The Bangles.
Right. And so early last year, I had kind of a lull, like my Nico book had been turned in. I contractually could not write another book until certain things had happened. So I started looking around, like, what project do I really, really, really want to do? And I made a list of like all the people that I'd love to do a project with. A lot of people already had books out. A lot of people didn't get back to me, but I just was emailing like everybody I could think of. And one of the top people on that list was the band, The Bangles. And so I just like went on their website and like fired off an email being like, this is who I am, da-di-da-di-da. Didn't hear anything. A couple months later, I was randomly talking with an acquaintance of mine from San Francisco. And because of COVID, she worked in events and she had taken a job basically chauffeuring celebrities to and from the airport. That was like her job during COVID. And I was talking to her and I'm like, oh, this Bangle, I really want to write a book on the Bangles. And she's like, that's so weird. She's like, tomorrow I have Vicky Peterson from the Bangles. I'm driving her. No and I was like, really? And I said, if I write you a letter, this is an acquaintance. This is Kat. This is not like a good friend. I said, if I write a letter about myself and I want to write her a book about them, would you give it to her? And she's like, yeah, totally. So I wrote this letter. I sent it to this friend of mine. She told me she'd given it to Vicky, but I was just like, if I were her, I would probably thrown it in the trash and been like, whatever. I don't want to look like a douche, giving some random letter to a celebrity. So fast forward, I forgot about the whole thing. Fast forward to about 2 months ago now. I wake up on a Saturday morning and there's an email in my inbox from Vicky Peterson saying, hello, I got this letter from you a year ago. I wasn't ready. The Bangles weren't ready to do a book then. Now we want to talk to you about doing a book.
Oh my God.
And is it still something you're interested in? And here's where it gets even more insane. The next day I wake up and there's an email from Susanna Hoffs in my inbox. And her and Vicky had completely researched me. They're just like, oh yeah, like in 2015, you wrote this thing about Sinead O'Connor. And then like you did your MA on the Smiths. And like so where I'm going with this is put yourself out there. Go for what you want, but then also be careful and very conscientious of like what you're saying on social media and like what you're putting out in the public sphere, because people can find it if they want to. That's really important, I think.
I've got one question left to ask you because it is called the brave moment. And I'd love to just discuss with you, what do you consider to be your bravest moment?
I would say I'm in the midst of one right now. The one that I would say I've had in the past is, this might sound really silly, but deciding to be in a relationship with my husband. Because I'd been in so many bad relationships and just been kind of beaten down to the point that I'm like, I felt like I really had no value in terms of a relationship. Like if someone liked me, that was enough. And when I came to England, I was just like, okay, I'm really going to try to find someone. I decided to just give it like 6 months, see if I could meet someone. And it was funny because my husband's the first guy I've ever met that within like 2 dates, he was like, I like you. I want to see if this can go somewhere. Do you want to be like boyfriend, girlfriend? And even though like, I think when you're single, that's what you want things to be easy. You want someone to be direct. I was so used to being like, just, led on and been in really not very good relationships that my immediate reaction was no. No, because I just don't want to
sound like you.
Yeah. I don't want to be hurt again.
Yeah.
And then I remember I took the tube home and I was walking back to my house and then I'm like, what do I have? Then I kind of it goes back to that hunter thing. Like, what do I have to lose? The worst thing that can happen is I'll be brokenhearted and I'll turn to Ben and Jerry's, my other boyfriends, and Mr. Jack Daniels, and I'll get over it. And so I said, yes. I said, yeah, let's try this out. And that was, almost 12 years ago now. So I would say that was one. Like, don't be afraid to let yourself be loved. I think that's a really important lesson. I would say the one I'm in now is kind of similar to that. And that is being kind of getting a little bit older. Like I'll be 50 next year. And I feel like I'm trying to learn, especially after lockdown and gaining weight and this, that, and the other. How do I learn how to be sexy and attractive and feel like a vibrant, hot woman, even though society tells me I should be invisible?
Oh my goodness. That is a big question. And when you get the answer to that, please share it with us in a book, preferably, so we can carry it around in our handbags.
Oh, bless you. So that's kind of the one I am in now. I would say, I know you only asked for one, but I'd say the last one is the day before I moved to England, I went to my favorite beach in Santa Cruz, where I'm from. And this is going to sound so lame, but it's so true. It's like a spiritual thing. I went in the water, no wetsuit, and I just was there and I just said, please, like energy of Santa Cruz, let me be successful. And if you let me be successful in going to England, I will come back and do something good for you. And I can't explain it any other way, but I just felt like completely enveloped in like hope and love and support at that moment.
Oh.
And so I've been really like, I have another book that I'm in the midst of working on with the guy that started Thrasher magazine, and he also started Santa Cruz Skateboards, and he's from Santa Cruz. And so that's kind of my little way of like giving back to Santa Cruz, is working on that project. So yeah, I
mean, that's super beautiful. I mean, talk about brave moments, but also the spiritual aspect of a brave moment, like how just being that compassionate towards your place, your spiritual place, and being able to give back in such a way. That's so beautiful to hear. And I wish you the best of luck with that. If people want to find you, where can they find you?
I am on Instagram like a whore constantly. So it's just Jennifer Otter Bickerdike, and my Twitter is Jen Otter Bickerdike. So go for Instagram. Like I always forget about Twitter, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I should check it. And there's like 15 messages, and I'm like, oh, oops. They're from like 2 months ago. I'm like, oh. So yeah, Jennifer Otter Bickerdike on Instagram. My book on Nico is available in the UK July 15th at all good bookstores. It's called You Are Beautiful and You Are Alone, the biography of Nico. And the Britney Spears book, I want to call it It's Britney Bitch, but my publisher thinks that is, he says it for as serious of a book as it is, because it's not a straight up biography. That book is what we call mosaic. So it's a bunch of different little bits and pieces that tell Britney's story in non-chronological order. So there's not going to be like facts about Britney you may not know, but what the book is more about is how Britney has created a whole culture in and around herself, not just of the brand of Britney, but these kind of cultural touchstones. It's almost like if a pebble is thrown in the water and how the waves go out from it. So that's what the Britney book is about.
I'm so excited. And as soon as it's up and ready, we'll definitely add a link into this show, and then obviously we'll talk about it on another one as well.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much for today. I know you're a super busy lady, so I feel very honored that you've given me the time.
Oh, girl. Thank you so much for having me.
Take care. Jennifer is known for her thorough, meticulous research when it comes to writing her books. She looks for balanced opinion and avidly collects evidence on her subject matter instead of relying on popular opinion. As a consequence, she is considered the creme de la creme of writers in the music industry celebrity. To those aspiring journalists, researchers, and biographers out there, she reminds us in this interview the importance of reaching out to those you may think are untouchable. And I agree here. Having the guts to send an email to those who inspire you about who you are and what your project is the best way to get what you desire from your writing dream. As she says, for every 5 no's, there's a yes. Not only that, but if you do a good job, then you suddenly have a recommendation list to boot. Reputation really does precede you in any creative industry, which you will find is smaller than you think. So be smart. Know that you are worthy to be seen by those you admire and get that hustle on. You've got to be in the game to play it, my friends. As Jennifer also recommends, if you want to be a writer, write. Create a portfolio of work, set yourself some personal goals, enter competitions, send in some articles to magazines and newspapers, and get into the practice of submitting your work. I still to this day write sample articles and send them into magazines. It's a great way to get free feedback, and you build up a rapport with certain media outlets who then invite you back for more work. Being brave really does apply to the writer's life. Jennifer's honouring of her friend's motto, "True is true," has led her on an extraordinary journey into what really matters for her. As she says, she gets to have anxiety, she gets to feel pain because she is alive with life, and as a consequence, she knows the value of regret. How having it is not an option for her as she lives for both herself and her friend Hunter. There is a wonderful lesson in there for creatives. We may not have a moment in life that changes us so profoundly, and I truly hope that none of you have to bear witness to the loss of life in such a way, but we all have the chance to live without regret. Don't sit on your stories. Don't leave your dream behind the curtains of your current reality. Get out there and be brave enough to chase your creative life, no matter how tough it may be or what you may have to do to get it. Finally, here is the Brave Moment Writer's Exercise for today. Think about a moment in your life that changed you. The goal here should be to answer the 6 questions of journalism: who, what, where, when, why, and how. So for instance, maybe your story is about rescuing a cat from a fire. Think about the timeline of events and write them down. Who was involved, what happened, when and where it took place, etc., etc. Now think about the bigger story at play. Did the cat belong to a grandfather who recently moved into a home? Did you have to face your phobia of fire? Did you learn that you were a fighter? Or did you prove to someone that thought you were cold-hearted that you were indeed someone who cared a great deal? Then expand the story again. Think about the other senses involved, the things you could smell, taste, touch, see, and hear. And then finally, think about why this story is important for the audience at large. What can the reader take away from the story? What do they learn about themselves through the moment that you share? Why should they care about what you have to say? At the end of the day, your story is not really yours at all once it's out of your head. It then belongs to the world. As Chuck Palahniuk once said, "A good story should make you laugh and a moment later break your heart." Next week on the show, we speak to BAFTA award-winning comedy writer and multi-hyphen celebrity Zara Janjua about writing for television, film, and radio. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the show. If you have a spare moment now, please like, subscribe, and tell me your thoughts in a review on Apple Podcasts, which will really help other people like yourself to find the show. Of course, you can also share the show with your friends by following us at the Brave Moment Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, or on Twitter at Moment Brave, or just follow the Linktree on all of our social media platforms. It's been so wonderful to have you all here with me again. Please get in touch with your own stories, and remember, your brave moment starts now.